12 Ka-52 attack helicopters, a forward staging base, 40 kilometers of Ukrainian frontline suddenly exposed. Then 8 Ukrainian drones changed everything. This is the story of a strike that didn't just destroy machines. It dismantled a Russian air superiority strategy that had been methodically strangling Ukrainian armored brigades along the southern axis for months. It happened fast. It was planned slowly. And the intelligence chain that made it possible was one of the most sophisticated targeting operations Ukrainian forces had ever assembled against a rotary-wing asset. By the time Russian ground crews understood what was happening, 3 Ka-52 alligators were already burning on the apron. The rest were trapped by their own refueling schedule. I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight, we reconstruct a Ukrainian long-range drone raid against a Russian forward helicopter base. A base that had been launching coordinated hunter-killer sorties against Ukrainian mechanized columns, Leopard 2 tanks, and armored personnel carriers operating in the open terrain of the southern axis. We follow the intelligence assembly, the deception operation that pulled Russian defensive drones away from the perimeter, and the final 6 minutes as a Ukrainian swarm arrived over the target. Stay with me. What unfolds in the next 30 minutes is a masterclass in how a smaller force with superior intelligence and disciplined patience defeats a larger force with superior firepower. To understand why this base mattered, you need to understand what Ka-52 helicopters were doing to Ukrainian ground forces in the weeks before the strike. The Ka-52 Alligator is not a simple battlefield helicopter. It's a dedicated hunter-killer platform, a 8-ton machine powered by 2 Klimov VK 2500 turboshaft engines, capable of cruising at 250 km per hour and carrying a weapons loadout that includes Beaver anti-tank guided missiles with a range of 10 kilometers. The coaxial rotor design eliminates the tail rotor, reducing acoustic signature and making the Ka-52 exceptionally maneuverable at low altitude. Standard combat radius, approximately 460 kilometers. Operational ceiling, over 5,000 meters. But the Ka-52's most dangerous feature in this phase of the war wasn't its weapon system. It was its fire control. The Samshit-E integrated targeting suite, combining a forward-looking infrared sensor, a television camera, and a laser rangefinder into a single nose-mounted turret. A Ka-52 crew can positively identify a tank-sized target at 8 kilometers in total darkness. At that range, a Ukrainian armored column advancing at night thinks it has cover. It doesn't. Russian doctrine along the southern axis had evolved into a specific pattern. Ka-52 pairs would launch from a forward staging base at night, fly nap of the earth at under 50 meters to avoid radar detection, pop up to altitude 3 to 5 kilometers behind the forward edge of the battle area, acquire targets using the Samshit thermal system, fire Viker salvos at standoff range, then descend again for the return leg before Ukrainian air defense could track them. The entire engagement profile from pop-up to egress could be completed in under 90 seconds. In a 6-week period, Ukrainian General Staff reports attributed the confirmed destruction of 14 armored vehicles along a 40-kilometer frontage to this specific tactic. Leopard 2A4 tanks, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, MTLB carriers hauling ammunition to forward positions. Each loss cost Ukraine not just the machine, but the crew, the morale, and the ground it had taken weeks of infantry fighting to hold. The tactical problem: Ukrainian man-portable air defense systems. MANPADS teams carrying Stinger and Piorin missiles couldn't reliably engage Ka-52S operating in the nap of the Earth profile. The helicopters appeared at altitude for 60 to 90 seconds, fired, and disappeared before a shoulder-fired team could acquire and launch. The window was too narrow. Longer-range systems like Iris-T and Gepard were committed to protecting population centers and logistics nodes further west. Spreading them across every kilometer of open front line wasn't feasible. So Ukrainian commanders faced a choice: accept the helicopter attrition, try to suppress the sorties with counter-battery radar and artillery, or take out the helicopters where they sat. They chose the latter. The problem was finding where they sat. Which weapon system do you think posed the greatest threat to Ukrainian armored brigades during this period? Comment below. A for Ka-52 alligators at standoff range. B for Russian artillery concentrations. C for Lancet loitering munitions. The answer matters because it shaped which intelligence resources Ukraine prioritized first. The search for the forward staging base began with a pattern of life analysis spanning approximately 3 months of observation. Ukrainian military intelligence, the HER, tasked satellite imagery assets, both commercial and partner-provided, against a cluster of candidate locations within operational range of the frontline contact zone. The geometric constraint was straightforward. A Ka-52 operating with a combat radius of 460 kilometers, conducting sorties lasting approximately 90 minutes, had to be based no further than 180 to 200 kilometers from the target zone. That radius, projected onto a map of Russian-controlled territory, pointed to a specific region along the southern axis. Commercial synthetic aperture radar imagery, the kind that cuts through cloud cover and works at night, started flagging anomalies. A cluster of temporary structures at a location's satellite imagery had previously shown as open field. Fuel bladders. A fuel truck pattern consistent with aviation-grade JP-8. Hardened revetments constructed from earth berms. The kind improvised quickly when a unit knows a location is temporary but needs protection from rocket artillery. The coordinates went into the targeting queue. But coordinates alone weren't enough. Ukraine had learned, expensively, that striking an empty revetment destroys dirt. What mattered was catching the helicopters in a specific phase of their operating cycle, the refuel and rearm window between sorties. This is where the intelligence operation became genuinely sophisticated. OSINT investigators and signals intelligence assets began building a sortie timing model. Ka-52 sorties against the southern axis were cross-referenced against contact reports from Ukrainian forward units, the time of first missile impact, the bearing of approach. Working backward from multiple engagements over 6 weeks, analysts built a histogram of sortie timing. The helicopters were launching at predictable intervals: pre-dawn sorties, post-dusk sorties, a midday stand-down during the hottest ground temperature window when thermal imaging degrades. Between sorties, a mandatory ground time of 60 to 90 minutes for refueling, rearming, and crew rotation. The refuel and rearm window was the vulnerability. Satellite imagery confirmed the pattern. On multiple occasions, commercial radar satellites passing over the target location at intervals consistent with the identified stand-down window showed all aircraft on the ground simultaneously. Heat signatures consistent with running APUs, auxiliary power units, visible on infrared passes indicating aircraft being serviced, not parked dormant. The intelligence was solid. The target was real. But the base had a protective screen. Russian forces had deployed a cluster of Orlan 10 reconnaissance drones operating in a persistent overwatch pattern around the base perimeter. The Orlan 10 is a fixed-wing reconnaissance UAV with an 8-hour endurance, carrying an electro-optical camera and a radio relay payload. Flying in a loose oval pattern at approximately 1,500 meters altitude, 2 or 3 Orlans maintained continuous sensor coverage of the approach corridors most likely used by attacking Ukrainian drones. Additionally, a Tor-M2 short-range air defense system, one of Russia's most capable point defense platforms, capable of engaging targets at altitudes down to 10 meters and ranges up to 12 kilometers, was positioned at the base. The Tor-M2 used a phased array radar to detect incoming threats. Against a conventional drone approach, it would have had adequate time to engage. The deception operation began approximately 4 hours before the strike. Ukrainian forces launched a set of commercial-grade quadcopters, modified DJI Mavic 3 variants carrying small, explosive payloads, from positions approximately 18 kilometers north of the base, angled to approach from a direction that would put them on the Orlan 10 detection radar first. These were sacrificial drones. Their purpose wasn't to damage anything. Their purpose was to trigger the Tor-M2 radar into active engagement mode and force the Orlan 10 operators to redirect their overwatch pattern toward the incoming commercial drone contact. The Tor-M2 crew, following doctrine, illuminated their engagement radar. They acquired the commercial drones. They fired. 2 Tor-M2 engagements, confirmed by the radar emission signature monitored by Ukrainian SIGINT teams listening on the fire control frequency, destroyed the decoy quadcopters at approximately 8 kilometers from the base perimeter. Now, the Tor-M2 crew had 2 problems they didn't yet recognize. Their missile magazine was partially depleted, and their engagement radar had been radiating for 90 seconds, long enough for Ukrainian passive electronic intelligence to refine the exact position of the Tor-M2 launcher to within 20 meters. The Orlan 10 operators redirected their patrol pattern northward, toward the area where the decoy drones had originated, the southern and western approach corridors. The corridors Ukrainian planners had identified as optimal ingress routes were temporarily unwatched. The window lasted approximately 14 minutes. That was all the time the Ukrainian drone teams needed. Stay with me. because what happens in the next 18 minutes destroys an entire helicopter squadron. The strike package consisted of 8 modified Beaver drones. Ukrainian-manufactured long-range FPV platforms based on the Beaver airframe that Ukrainian defense industry engineers had iterated through multiple combat versions. These were not the commercial quadcopter FPV drones that Ukrainian infantry units used against Russian trenches. The Beaver used in this operation was a fixed-wing design with a pusher motor configuration, a wingspan of approximately 4 meters, and a loiter endurance of over 3 hours. Payload: a shaped charge warhead derived from an RPG-7 round, modified for nose detonation on contact. Individually, one Beaver wouldn't reliably destroy a Ka-52. The Kamov's titanium armor bathtub around the cockpit can absorb significant fragmentation. But the helicopters on the apron weren't the only targets on the base. Ukrainian targeting had identified 4 categories of high-value targets: the fuel bladders supplying JP-8 aviation fuel, the ordnance carts staging Vickers missiles, and B-8V-20 unguided rocket pods for the next sortie. The ground crew support vehicles, fuel trucks, and maintenance vans. That had to be present during the service window, and the helicopters themselves if opportunity presented. The strike allocation was specific: 2 Beavers targeting fuel bladders, 2 targeting the ordnance staging area, 2 targeting vehicle concentrations, 2 held back as a floating reserve, tasked against any helicopter that attempted to start its engines and reposition. The approach route followed a terrain mask, a ridgeline running roughly southwest to northeast that kept the drones below the Orlan 10 radar horizon during ingress. Ground speed: approximately 120 kilometers per hour. Altitude above ground level: 40 meters. The drones flew in a staggered trail formation separated by approximately 30 seconds of flight time, designed to arrive over the target in a rolling sequence rather than simultaneously, preventing the TOR-M2 crew from engaging multiple tracks at once. The mission was controlled by a relay drone orbiting at 3,000 meters altitude, 18 kilometers behind the swarm. Too far for the TOR-M2 to engage efficiently, and high enough to maintain line-of-sight data link to all 8 Beavers simultaneously. The relay drone transmitted real-time video from each platform to a ground control station where a team of 6 operators monitored the feeds and made terminal assignment decisions. At the 6-kilometer mark from the target, the first Beaver cleared the terrain mask and entered the TOR-M2 radar coverage zone. The TOR-M2 crew acquired it within 4 seconds. Engagement authorization was requested from the base commander. Standard doctrine requires command authorization before expending TOR-M2 missiles against single slow-moving contacts to avoid depleting the magazine on reconnaissance drones. Authorization delay: an estimated 15 to 20 seconds. By the time authorization cleared, the first Beaver was 4 kilometers from the outer fence. The TOR-M2 launched. The Beaver executed a programmed evasive maneuver, a tight descending spiral to 30 meters above the ground, and the TOR-M2 missile, optimized for engagements at higher altitudes, clipped the edge of the engagement envelope. The Beaver wasn't destroyed. It was shaken. Its video feed spiked with static for 3 seconds, then stabilized. The second Beaver was now entering TOR-M2 radar range. The third. The fourth. The TOR-M2 radar operator faced a multiple-track engagement problem that the system's fire control software wasn't built to handle. The TOR-M2 is a point defense weapon designed to defeat individual incoming precision missiles or aircraft on a defined engagement axis. Against 8 simultaneous low-altitude tracks approaching from a 60-degree arc, the engagement software struggled to prioritize. Fire control attempted to engage the highest closing speed track first. Standard protocol. The first Vickers bladder had already been punctured by the lead Beaver before the TOR-M2 could complete its second engagement solution. Subscribe to East Alert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. The fuel ignited. JP-8 aviation fuel is not gasoline. It doesn't ignite instantly with a spark. It requires heat and atomization. A shaped charge detonating inside a fuel bladder provides both simultaneously. The bladder, containing approximately 12,000 liters of fuel, ruptured and ignited in a fireball that eyewitness accounts, compiled in post-strike OSINT analysis, described as visible from 8 kilometers away. The thermal column spiked upward to approximately 200 meters. The heat triggered the TOR-M2 system's thermal masking protocol, a defensive mode where the fire control radar reduces its gain to prevent saturation from nearby heat sources. For approximately 40 seconds, the TOR-M2 was effectively blind in the sector directly downrange of the fuel fire. Those 40 seconds were the decisive window. The second and third Beavers turned toward the ordnance staging area. Two Vickers missiles staged on a cart detonated when a shaped charge initiated the rocket motor propellant. The secondary explosions threw shrapnel across a 40-meter radius, destroying a second fuel truck, shredding a maintenance van, and puncturing the hydraulic lines on the closest Ka-52 on the apron. How many Ka-52 helicopters did Ukrainian forces neutralize in this strike? We asked you to remember that question earlier. We'll answer it precisely. But first, because the number only makes sense with the full context, let's walk through the final 4 minutes. The TOR-M2 crew regained engagement capability at approximately the 40-second mark after the fuel fire ignition. They acquired 2 Beaver tracks simultaneously. They launched a dual engagement, 2 missiles, 2 targets. Both Beavers were destroyed. The TOR-M2 missile magazine was now empty. The launcher crew began the manual reload procedure. Under combat conditions, reloading a TOR-M2 takes approximately 25 minutes. The remaining 4 Beavers had no air defense opposing them. The 2 floating reserve Beavers were now tasked against the helicopters directly. One Ka-52 had been running its APU when the strike began, pre-flighting for the next sortie. The crew, a pilot and weapons systems officer, were in the cockpit. Ukrainian drone operators, watching real-time thermal video from the relay drone, could see the APU exhaust plume clearly. The Beaver was directed toward the engine air intake. The coaxial rotor design of the Ka-52 means both rotors are mounted directly above the fuselage. There is no tail rotor to protect. A charge detonated inside or adjacent to an engine intake causes catastrophic blade fragment ingestion. The Ka-52 on the pre-flight check never completed its startup sequence. A second Ka-52 attempted to start engines at the moment the ordnance cart's secondary explosions walked shrapnel across the apron. A fragment cut the aircraft's main fuel feed line at the engine bay. Fuel sprayed across a hot exhaust manifold. The helicopter didn't explode immediately. The fuel spray missed the ignition point initially. But the fire that started 30 seconds later was beyond what the ground crew's fire suppression equipment could handle. The remaining Beavers targeted vehicles: 2 fuel trucks, a maintenance crane, a command vehicle parked near the base operations tent. Total time from first Beaver crossing the outer fence to last Beaver impact, 6 minutes and 14 seconds. Is this the right way to fight a war? Accepting that the line between a legitimate military target and a catastrophic explosion is sometimes measured in seconds and meters? Drop your answer in the comments. Post-strike battle damage assessment, compiled from commercial satellite imagery taken in the hours following the strike and cross-referenced with Ukrainian drone footage captured during the operation, showed the following. 3 Ka-52 helicopters confirmed destroyed, 2 by direct impact and fire, 1 by the secondary explosion chain from the ordnance staging detonations. Combat footage verification shows the airframes collapsed, rotor heads separated, total structural write-off. 2 Ka-52 helicopters confirmed damaged but potentially repairable, 1 with the hydraulic system failure from shrapnel, 1 with shrapnel damage to the fuselage and avionics bay. Satellite imagery showed both aircraft being loaded onto heavy transport vehicles in the 48 hours following the strike, consistent with evacuation to a rear maintenance facility. 7 Ka-52 helicopters showed no visible structural damage. But with the fuel storage destroyed, the TOR-M2 missile supply exhausted, and the ordnance staging area eliminated, the base was operationally dead. A helicopter with no fuel is not a weapon. Ground support infrastructure losses, 4 fuel trucks destroyed, 1 maintenance crane destroyed, 3 support vehicles destroyed, the primary JP-8 bladder system destroyed. Personnel casualties, as estimated by Ukrainian sources, between 12 and 20 Russian military personnel. Ground crew, TOR-M2, crew members, and support staff were assessed as killed or seriously wounded in the strike, primarily by the secondary explosions from the ordnance staging detonations. If you believe tactics win wars, type East Alert in the comments. The strategic impact was measurable within 72 hours. Ukrainian General Staff reports noted a complete cessation of Ka-52 nap of the earth sorties against the 40-kilometer frontage the destroyed base had been covering. Forward armor units that had been moving only at night and in small dispersed packets reported being able to move mechanized formations in the daytime for the first time in weeks. A Ukrainian brigade that had been stalled on a specific axis due to helicopter interdiction resumed its advance. In the 4 weeks following the strike, that brigade moved forward approximately 6 kilometers, ground locked in stalemate under the helicopter threat umbrella. Russian command responded by relocating surviving helicopters to a base further from the front line. The redeployment added approximately 45 minutes to the round-trip flight time per sortie, reducing the number of sorties each crew could complete per day and reducing time over the target zone before fuel constraints forced return. The helicopter interdiction threat didn't disappear, it degraded. But degradation, compounded across weeks, translates into ground. Intercepted communications, monitored and partially published by Ukrainian military intelligence, revealed the reaction of the Russian base commander in the immediate aftermath of the strike. The communications, whose authenticity Ukrainian sources assessed as high, showed a command element that was genuinely shocked by the precision of the attack. One exchange, translated from Russian, described the strike as arriving from nowhere, an indication that the deception operation had successfully masked the drone ingress until the final 60 seconds, when no defensive action was viable. The phrase "from nowhere" is revealing. It reflects the core failure of Russian defensive doctrine at this stage of the conflict. The Tor-M2 is an excellent short-range air defense system against conventional threats: fixed-wing aircraft, cruise missiles, large ballistic re-entry vehicles. It was not designed around the threat of 8 simultaneous small-signature fixed-wing drones flying nap of the Earth in an extended trail formation. The radar cross-section of a single Beaver drone is approximately 0.01 square meters, equivalent to a large bird on the Tor-M2's engagement radar. Against a mixed approach that included decoys from one direction and the main strike from another, the system was cognitively and procedurally overwhelmed. What would NATO planners have done differently to defend this base? Consider the options in the comments. Were there defensive configurations that would have stopped this strike? This is the tactical lesson that extends beyond this single engagement. Russia has spent the conflict attempting to apply Soviet-era point defense doctrine, fixed systems protecting fixed assets, against an adversary that has mastered distributed attack. Ukrainian drone operations in this phase have consistently exploited the cognitive bandwidth limitations of any point defense crew. A Tor-M2 crew can track 8 targets, but can they prioritize 8 simultaneous threats approaching from 2 different directions, with a fuel fire degrading their radar gain, while requesting engagement authorization from a commander who may not be immediately reachable? The answer, demonstrated here, is no. The Israeli Iron Dome solves part of this problem through autonomous engagement priority algorithms. American counter-UAS systems fielded in this period. Coyote, interceptor drones, DE-based pulse systems address the drone swarm threat specifically. Russia's ground-based point defense inventory, developed for Cold War threat profiles, has no adequate equivalent for the specific combination of tactics Ukrainian operators employed here. The obstacle Ukraine's drone operators faced before this strike was not capability. The Beaver airframe could cover the distance. The warheads could cause the required damage. The relay drone could maintain command. The obstacle was timing. The problem of building a sortie cycle model accurate enough to guarantee that 12 helicopters would be on the ground simultaneously rather than in the air. 3 months of patient observation, dozens of satellite passes, correlation of ground unit contact reports with sortie timing data, a statistical model built from 6 weeks of attack events. That is the real weapon in modern warfare. Not the drone, but the intelligence architecture that puts the drone in the right place at the right moment. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. The deception element deserves its own emphasis. The decision to lead with sacrificial commercial drones to trigger the Tor-M2 radar, depleting its missile magazine and forcing the Orlan 10 Overwatch to redirect, was not improvised. It required knowing the Tor-M2 engagement authorization procedure well enough to calculate the delay window. It required knowing the Orlan 10 patrol pattern well enough to predict the redirection arc. It required confidence that the terrain mask ingress route would hold the main strike package below detection threshold until the Tor-M2 was already committed. This is operational planning at a level of technical depth that, earlier in the conflict, Ukrainian forces were still developing. By this phase, it had become a replicable template. Real tactics. Real consequences. East Tailert. The closing image from the strike footage, captured by one of the Beavers in its final seconds of flight, shows the apron from approximately 30 meters altitude. The fuel fire is already a column. The ordnance cart secondary has already detonated. And 3 Ka-52s are sitting in their revetments, rotor blades folded for the service stand-down, going nowhere. Machines designed to deny Ukrainian forces 40 kilometers of sky. Caught in a 60-minute window they had used 100 times before. This time, someone was counting. Now let's answer the quiz question posed earlier. How many Ka-52 helicopters did Ukrainian forces destroy in this strike? You had 3 options: A, 23, B-38, C-50? The answer is none of those numbers. 3 Ka-52 helicopters were confirmed destroyed. 2 were confirmed damaged. The remaining 7 were rendered operationally inactive by the destruction of the base's fuel and ammunition supply. That is the full picture, and it reflects a targeting philosophy Ukraine has refined throughout this conflict. The goal is not always the platform. Sometimes the goal is the support ecosystem without which the platform cannot function. 12 helicopters denied to the front line, 8 drones, 6 minutes and 14 seconds. 3 questions worth sitting with. Was the decision to spend 3 months building a sortie cycle model, rather than attempting earlier strikes with incomplete intelligence, the right strategic choice? Every week of observation was another week of Ukrainian armor losses to Ka-52 sorties. Could Russian base commanders have prevented this by simply varying their refueling schedule, breaking the predictable rotation pattern that Ukrainian analysts exploited? A randomized stand-down window of 90 minutes either side of the identified pattern might have been enough to prevent the intelligence model from reaching targeting confidence. And the hardest question, what would you have done differently? Commanding the Ukrainian drone operation if the Tor M2 had not taken the decoy bait? The strike package existed because the deception worked. If the Orlan 10s had maintained their patrol pattern and the Tor M2 crew had held their fire, waiting for a confirmed multi-track engagement before going active, would the mission have aborted? Comment your answer. Subscribe to East Alert. We break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The staging base is quiet now. The revetments are scorched. The fuel bladders are craters. And somewhere on a road moving west, heavy transport vehicles are carrying the burned shells of 3 Ka-52 alligators away from a base that no longer serves its purpose. The rotation window opened one time too many. Ukrainian operators were there when it did. Stay vigilant.